All right.
All
Thank you
right.
for
Thank you
joining
for
me for
joining me
another
for another
episode of
episode of
Jackman
Jackman
Radio.
Radio.
And I'm very
And I'm very
excited
excited
today.
today.
I'm joined by
I'm
a
joined by
guest
a
who I
guest
wanted
who
to
I
talk
wanted
to
to
for a
talk to
while.
for a while.
She's
She's
very well
very
known
well
for
known for
anti-war
anti-war
activism
activism
and
and
speaking out
speaking
against
out against
corruption in
corruption
US
in U.S.
imperialism.
imperialism.
Former
Former
Colonel Ann
Colonel
Wright.
Ann Wright.
Pleasure to be with you, Eric.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
joining
much
me.
for joining me.
So I just wanted to bring you on and talk to you because
because
we're getting close to another anniversary of the Iraq War. And, with everything that's going on, we had the pullout of Afghanistan. We had the 20-year anniversary of 9/11. I think sometimes people forget about Iraq. So leading up to this anniversary, which is going to be the 19th anniversary, because that was 2003. How are you feeling about the legacy of Iraq? And do you think that's something that the United States will repeat again, especially in looking at what's happening with Russia and Ukraine right now?
Well, for God's sakes, I hope they don't repeat it. We are pretty stupid, and repeating dumb things is a characteristic, I'm afraid, of our government. I resigned over the Iraq War 19 years ago in March, as I think you've alluded to, and I don't think our decision-making process in our U.S. government has improved at all. And in fact, what we're seeing right now with this warmongering rhetoric that the Biden administration is doing, it's even the Ukrainians are saying the Russians are not going to invade us. Biden says they are too going to invade you, and we're going to send you $500 million worth of weapons just so the warmonger corporations can make a little bit more money. But even when the people whose country it is that supposedly is under threat is saying we're not under threat, and you're threatening us more than the Russians, who actually have military forces on the border, and whose ethnic Russians that live on that border undoubtedly are receiving some military assistance from the Russian government. I would find it hard to believe that they're not, considering the history of what our own country does, which supports all sorts of people who are doing things that are what is thought to be beneficial to our own government. So it is a dangerous predicament that we're in right now, but it's nothing. It's the same old stuff. It's like these governments, it doesn't matter who's in power, the Democrats or the Republicans, they're all a bunch of warmongers.
Yeah, absolutely. That policy really hasn't changed. So if you were steering the ship of U.S. foreign policy, how would you work with Russia and Ukraine to diffuse tensions and kind of move towards a real reset with Russia and some kind of détente?
Well, we know exactly what the Russian demands are and have been for over 30 years. Ever since the end of the Cold War and the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and Gorbachev and George Bush the first coming to an agreement that the United States would not poach countries that were a part of the former Warsaw Pact. And it was an agreement that the U.S. had with what became the Russian Federation, an agreement that the U.S. has breached, as we seem to breach a lot of international agreements and treaties. And so over the last 30 years, the U.S. has picked off all of these countries that used to be a part of the Warsaw Pact, or the countries of the, kind of the former Soviet Union, the alliances that they had made. And finally, the Russian government under Putin, who's been in power way too long, as has happened, he's finally dug his heels in, and then Biden has dug his heels in. And, when you get two groups that are really not really doing diplomatic dialogue, they are just doing confrontation, then that's very, very dangerous. And particularly when the Russians have said, okay, this really is, we mean something, because we're going to put 125,000 military troops on the border. One could argue, though, the United States does military operations and exercises in Europe when you add in the NATO component, they're well over 100,000 people that are every year have military war games on the border of Russia. So actually, Russia is not doing any more to NATO than NATO has done to them. But that part of it never comes out in our U.S. media. I mean, our media is just such a complicit, pansy group of people who refuses to, really, analyze things and say, well, wait a minute, I'm going to call BS on that because this, and that. And it breaks your heart because, good, honest journalism is a key to honesty in our relations with other countries, and we can see our own media is really letting us down, with very few exceptions. Like Democracy Now! Will call their hand, and some of the online folks. But boy, the big media, both TV and print, is doing a great disservice to us.
Yeah, did you happen to catch Oliver Stone's documentary series with Vladimir Putin called The Putin Interviews?
Yeah, many years ago he did that. And if you listen to what Putin says in his annual free for all with the press, which is usually, it's kind of like a Fidel Castro, endless hours that he sits there and takes the questions and answers them. And when you listen to them, his answers are not outrageous. His answers are very well reasoned, and there is a method to his, to what he's doing. I don't agree with all of it, but it's, it's well thought out, and for the people of the Russian Federation, it makes sense. And he still is, extremely popular leader for the Russian Federation.
Right. Yeah, he's been in there since 1999. New Year's there. That was Yeltsin who kind of shoehorned him in.
Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting thing about how he became the head of all of Russia. He wasn't trained in that really. He was a KGB agent and was over in East Germany. In fact, speaks German fluently, and I guess that's what he and Merkel communicated more in German probably than they did in English, which he also speaks. And anyway, he's a very interesting character. There was one little small time when he allowed somebody else to be elected as prime minister or president or whatever the terminology is, but in general, he's been in charge, and in very difficult times in terms of the Soviet Union and coming out of it, and Yeltsin and the sell-off of all of the industries and the privatization that really just hammered the Russian economy, and then trying to build it back up and making really a new country. I was in Russia quite a bit at the 2 years after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, when 15 new republics were formed out of the border areas of the Soviet Union, and I was at the US Embassy in Uzbekistan and in Kyrgyzstan, and made frequent trips up to Moscow because that's where we got the money to run the US embassies down in these countries. So we were up there frequently, and to see the change in that country 30 years ago to now is quite startling.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, after the Soviet Union broke up, they were starving basically.
Yeah. It was a very, very difficult economic time, and trying to rebuild out of it has been a challenge. But when you go to the major cities of Russia, they're just like every other major city in Europe. They have, they have been able to move from poverty after the dissolution of the Soviet Union onto an economic system that is quite parallel to what the capitalists of the West are doing. The good, the bad, and the ugly of the capitalists of the West.
Right. So, warmongers, if you're listening, policymakers, Colonel Ann Wright and I say no war with Russia.
That's right.
So I want to pivot
or
to
China either, please.
Oh, yeah, God help us with China. or China, as Trump would say.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I want to pivot to the lead up to the Iraq War. What was the environment like inside of the U.S. State Department and the government overall, especially for people like you who were like raising red flags and standing up against it and saying, hey, we should take a time out here?
Well, the timeout was not listened to at all. The senior leadership, political leadership of the State Department was following lockstep with what groups like John Bolton, Donald Rumsfeld, and sadly, Colin Powell, who went along with it. It was like, well, this decision's already been made. Dick Cheney leading George Bush by the nose. We're going to do this because this is something we've wanted to do for decades. And the Project for the New American Century had laid it all out by all the conservatives of the Republican Party about how many countries they wanted to take down and revolutionize, so to speak. And so Afghanistan had already tumbled by going after the Taliban, who didn't have anything to do with 9/11, but since Al-Qaeda had operatives there, that might as well take out the Taliban. And poor old Afghanistan, which you had mentioned earlier in the broadcast here, after 20 years of the U.S. being there and trillions of dollars, and then the pitiful departure. I mean, I was very much for the U.S. getting out of Afghanistan, not waiting 20 years, but done under reasonable circumstances, and it certainly did not happen that way. So the Biden administration has a lot to be, we need to hold them accountable. We also, to the extent you can hold any previous administrations accountable, I mean, the Trump administration brokered a pitiful deal. It was all done just very poorly, and of course the people that suffer are the citizens of Afghanistan, who are now freezing and starving and have no money because the U.S. and at the behest of the U.S., the Western powers have frozen the funds that are actually the money for the people of Afghanistan that can pay the civil servants, the teachers, the healthcare workers, the guys and gals that work on the streets and all of that. Nope, the money isn't there. We're holding it because we don't want the Taliban to even touch it.
Right. Now, you were Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Afghanistan. So when did you arrive there, and what was that like, and what did your duties include?
Well, I was part of a very small team of 5 people that arrived in mid-December of 2001. The embassy had already been secured by the Marine Corps. There were about 100 Marines that were living on the roof of the embassy and had secured several offices in it. But we were the first State Department folks to arrive. And when we arrived, I mean, the offices that we went into, you could tell nobody had been there in over a decade. The dust was this tall, the letters, the materials that officers had on their desk on the day they left were still there. We went down in the cafeteria. The cafeteria was still set up with plates and dishes and glasses on tables. And when we lifted them up, there was dirt all around them, but you lift them up and there was clean. Bottom line was, we went in and we were told to get there before Hamid Karzai, who had been selected as the interim president, would get there. And so we did, and then our jobs were to be the liaison with the new Afghan government and to host any senior officials from the U.S. government that wanted to come out to Afghanistan to see what was going on. And that was one of the great challenges because our embassy had been closed for over 12 years. We had 2 little Volkswagen Passats that were working, and that was it. We had no running water in the main embassy. We had a tunnel that had been dug out to try to keep our local workers, who we had maintained on the payroll for 12 years. There was a tunnel where they could go into it in case the Mujahideen were firing rockets over the embassy compound, and one of them missed and went into the compound. Anyway, there was a little tunnel that had 3 rooms in it and a bathroom, and that's where we lived and where we had our offices for about the first 6 weeks that we were there. So our job was to once President Karzai arrived, and they set up the administration to meet with them, to find out what their ideas were, their plans, and to send the word back to Washington of what they were hoping. And then from the Washington end, we were to then go back to the government to give what Washington's view was on things. And then when we started having a never-ending stream of congressional delegations, and then senior levels of the State Department, to include Colin Powell, and all of these things that you have to have transportation, you have to get some lodging, you've got to get this, you've got to get that. Now, I remember one time when, very early in this, Joe Biden, as a senator, arrived, and he was with a small delegation, and we set up cots in the main part of the embassy, and they slept on cots just like everybody else. So it was a very, very interesting time, and I ended up staying there for about 3 months, and then went on to my next assignment, which was in Mongolia, and it was 8 months after that, at the beginning of the Iraq War, that I resigned in opposition to that war.
Now, while you were in Afghanistan for those 3 months, did you have any insight into opium production, or hear anything about that went on over there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was, although it was one of the things that the Taliban at that stage had actually reduced the amount of heroin production, poppy production in the country during their reign from 1996 to 2001. We were getting rumors that, the Taliban's gone, so let's start planting those poppies. So one of the first agencies that we had come out to Afghanistan was the DEA, to see what they could figure out about how to stem poppy production, because we knew it was going to, it is the main, still is the main source of income actually for the country. Despite 20 years of the United States being there and 20 years of anti-drug work, it still is a major crop and is still smuggled out, although the smuggling cannot be too much underground because so much of it leaves the country. It's like the war on drugs. The war on drugs that we had down in Central and South America, all it did was kill thousands of people, and the demand for it in the United States, which drives it, all the demand did was increase. And so the war on drugs has been a pitiful, pitiful failure, whether it would be in Central and South America or in Afghanistan. It does not work. The only thing that will work is stopping the demand. And as you can see in our own country, we got so many people that are on every sort of drugs. It's just, it's heartbreaking.
My state here in New Hampshire has been hit so hard by the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
So when you say that about it not being so underground, the U.S., whether it be our intelligence agencies, the Pentagon, whoever it is, they know this is going on, and they have to, at some level, be sanctioning it.
I wouldn't say they're sanctioning it, but I guess the way I look at it, in order to stop it, you almost have to bomb. You've got to bomb the fields. You've got to firebomb the fields. They didn't want to do that because that's where if you were trying to, you're kind of caught on it. Although we were caught and didn't do anything the right way, that's for sure. But if you wanted to get people kind of on the side of the U.S. government, then destroying their crops and having nothing to take its place, nothing. I mean, there had been ideas, how about if they grow wheat? Or how about if they grow this? Well, the poppy farmers would say, well, how about if you give us about $50,000, because that's about what will be, wheat gets, you can sell wheat for nothing. But if you'll repay us what we are earning with this drug stuff, then fine, we won't do it. And it would have been easier, and certainly it would have helped the world better if we would just paid them off, and they wouldn't grow it, but they'd still have money to live on and everything. And that would have stopped the production all the way along the line. And one could say that maybe we would have had a lot fewer addicts in Europe and in the US because the supply just wouldn't have been there.
Yeah, I definitely think it's worth exploring the Portuguese model dealing with addiction to like heroin and opioids. They seem to have some success with that.
Mm-hmm.
So you're from Arkansas originally, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So we're talking about drug smuggling and production of drugs. You ever hear anything about Mena, Arkansas, with Bill Clinton?
Oh yeah, from back in the the Central American Wars. It had a little airport that planes were flying into. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Barry Seal.
With drugs, yeah, from Central America and South America. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So do you have what kind of memories do you have of Bill Clinton from Arkansas?
Well, Clinton was a professor. He and Hillary both were professors at the law school when I was in law school. Even though we're all the same age, all around 75, they had already completed their law degrees at Yale, and I had just come back from the Army and had decided I would go to law school. So it was very interesting to meet both of them. And Hillary was an excellent teacher, an excellent teacher. Bill was there for a year and a half, and then he ran for Attorney General of the state, and then later on as governor of the state. And that's when I lost track of them. I went my way, they went their way.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, the movie about Mena there was called American Made. And Tom Cruise played Barry Seal, the CIA cocaine pilot.
Yeah.
And they have a funny allusion to Bill Clinton at the end of the movie, where Barry Seal is in prison, and they're like, "Don't worry, I'll be out of here soon." And it's implied that a call is made to Bill Clinton.
Well, I don't know. I never heard that part of it. He was not known at all in that way. I mean, who knows what goes on behind the scenes? I certainly didn't. But that was not part of the legacy that he had in Arkansas. Womanizing, apparently, yes. But the other part, I don't know about.
So I was very curious about your time spent in North Korea, which I find to be fascinating and very courageous on your behalf. And I know that we get a lot of propaganda and BS about what things are really like in North Korea. Because one of my best friends has been there several times. So could you speak a little bit about your experiences in North Korea and what you were doing there and what it was like?
Yeah. Well, it was one of the few countries that I had never been to in 2014 when a friend, Christine Ann, said, "I'm organizing a trip of women to go to North Korea, and we're going to meet with North Korean women, and we're going to talk about peace on the Korean Peninsula." And I looked at her like, "You've got to be crazy. What are you talking about, going to North Korea? Are you?" Well, it turned out she'd already been to North Korea twice to lay the groundwork for this, to get to start talking with North Korean officials about bringing 30 international women, and as it turned out, 30 that included 2 Nobel Peace Laureates, Gloria Steinem, who is a long-time activist and feminist, and has done a lot of work on the international scene on peace issues. So Christine said, "Well, I'm getting this group together, and wouldn't you want to go and see what it's like?" And it's like, "Well, I guess so." Because my motto has always been, I want to go to the places where my government does not want me to go, because I want to see what's there, because I don't believe all of the propaganda that our government feeds us about, whether it be Cuba, Iran, Yemen, you name it. And when you go there and see what's going on, it's not quite the same as what we're being fed by our government or by our media. So I signed on, and off we went. And we only spent 5 days there, but it was very, very interesting. It was, and I mean, we were definitely under the control of the North Korean government, which we knew we would be when we went. Uh, Tourists just don't wander around in North Korea, that's for sure. That there's always a government minder with you. And it's not the first place that I've had government minders with me. And in fact, as a diplomat, most of the time you were with government officials in whatever country. And, sometimes they didn't want you to see things you wanted to see. And other times, yeah, they helped you out. So it wasn't like I was offended by the government officials with us. It was an opportunity to get to know some of the younger people in the government better than we would have. Better. Uh, we also met with about 250 North Korean women in a symposium on peace that was fascinating. They told us about the stories of the Korean War, the carpet bombing that the U.S. did, which essentially leveled North Korea, and the attempt of the North Korean government or North Korean people to recover from that, which included the division of their own country, of North Korea being in the kind of in the Soviet realm, and then the South being in the U.S. realm, and the divided families of it. It's really startling how many families, even if you talk to Koreans that are immigrants here in the U.S., many of them have families that are in North Korea and South Korea. So, no, to be there to hear the stories of what happened during that war, the challenges of developing the country, with the threat of the United States always there saying, we're going to bomb the hell out of you again. And it wasn't like the North Koreans just said, "Oh, we're so sorry." Da, da, da. No, they stood up to the power of the U.S. and they used a lot of their monies that were coming in when they could trade on the international market, which the U.S. has now cut off for them. The sanctions the U.S. has on North Korea are some of the most brutal there are in the world. But still, they put satellites into the cosmos. They're firing rockets like crazy, like it's the 4th of July, for God's sakes. And these are not inexpensive rockets. And the technology for it, I mean, the North Koreans are not stupid. Boy, they are not stupid. They've been able to develop all sorts of technology with minimal funding, with minimal resources. So you got to give them credit that despite what the world is doing to them, choking them off because of human rights abuses, which I totally think they would be much better off if they didn't have so many human rights abuses. But they say, well, the people we have in prison are the ones that are trying to overthrow our government, and we don't want that to happen. So it's a tough situation, but it's not a good one at all to have those human rights violations. Anyway, the bottom line was we went there, we stayed 5 days. We had 2 marches with women, one in Pyongyang, one in Kaesong. We had 2 long discussions. And our delegation that was made up of women from 15 countries, some of them conflict countries, those women told the North Korean women what they had been through, whether it was through revolution, whether it was through drug violence, whether it was, whatever it was. So the North Korean women really, they got a good look at how the other parts of the world were dealing with challenges that outside forces had brought in or internal forces had been brought in. So it was interesting that we got to do all of our presentations and that the North Korean government said, yes, we want you to talk about what's going on in the world. And then subsequently to that, we went into South Korea, had a symposium with South Korean women and a march with them. 6 months later, we met with North Korean women in Bali, and we met also with South Korean women. And we've continued to meet with North Korean women in Beijing, and we would love to be able to go back to Pyongyang, but the Trump administration has made it impossible for an average citizen of the United States to go to North Korea, because now you have to get a special validation passport from the State Department to even apply for a visa to North Korea. So it has just cut dramatically the numbers of Americans that are able to go to the country. The only ones that have been able to get those special validation passports and then get a visa to North Korea are people who have had long-standing medical and humanitarian programs in North Korea. But not all of the programs have been able to send their staff in. So, again, we're not being able to ferret out really what's going on there because we're at the control of our own U.S. government and our media about what's happening, and they don't always tell the truth.
So overall, what were your thoughts on Trump meeting with Kim Jong-un?
Well, I thought it was a good deal. I mean, there's not much good that I'll say about Trump, but his decision to meet with Kim Jong-un was right. And I am so sad that people like John Bolton, who would never, I mean, he was going to have a heart attack if the U.S. signed any sort of peace agreement with the North Koreans. It's so sad that at the last moment in Vietnam that Trump was persuaded by the war hawks that no further negotiations could go on with the North Koreans. There was a great opportunity there, and I'm sad that Biden hadn't picked up on it. The South Korean President Moon, definitely wants to try to get a peace agreement with North Korea, because for God's sakes, it's his people who are going to get killed. The North Koreans and South Koreans are going to get killed if there's a war. A few Americans will, but not many. It's like the U.S. again sacrificing other people for our own aims. I don't agree with the North Koreans having nuclear weapons, and I don't agree with the U.S. having them either. I think both powers having them, and the Russians and the Chinese and the Israelis and the Brits and the 9 countries that have them, they all ought to give them up, because all it is just a threat to the extermination of the world, of our Earth, if there's a nuclear war. So all of them ought to give them up.
I agree. You can't say Israel has them. It's secret.
Secret, yeah.
So yeah, that's a good pivot over to Israel. So another thing that I first heard about you when I was younger was the Gaza flotilla that you went on, which I just want to thank you for doing that, and tell you that I can't believe the guts to do something like that. So talk a little bit about the flotilla, how you got involved, what that was, and what your experiences were.
Sure. Well, as a U.S. diplomat, one of the questions that you get asked in any country in the world that you're assigned as a diplomat there is, what's the deal on the U.S. always protecting the state of Israel, no matter what criminal acts it does on the Palestinians or anybody else? And about all you can say is, well, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it is U.S. policy, and it's been going on for 60 years now. And within the State Department, it's one of the things that is never changed, really. It really isn't. It's just whatever Israel wants, Israel gets. There's a very proud lobby, a very wealthy lobby in the U.S. of Zionists, of Christians and Jewish people who will wreak havoc on a congressional candidate if they speak out against the latest atrocity that Israel has done to the Palestinians. When I resigned from the government, that freed me up. I was able to talk about my concerns about what was going on the danger to the Israelis themselves of what they were doing, much less, the horrific things that were going on to the Palestinians. But it was in late 2008 and 2009 with the Israeli latest attack on Gaza, that it was like, I cannot believe that the Israelis are getting away with bombing, 27 days of bombing Gaza. So I called up a good friend, Medea Benjamin, and Medea, Ty Berry, and I went to Gaza. There were already a couple of U.S. folks that were there. Hueda Arif, who's actually running for Congress now, Kathy Kelly of Voices for Creative Nonviolence had gone. And we all went to see with our own eyes what had happened. And we didn't get to stay long because we went through Egypt. Of course, the Israelis wouldn't let us in. You better get in and come back out pretty quickly because if you get stuck in there, we don't know when you're going to be able to get out. So I we went in, stayed 48 hours, and saw so much trauma, so many destroyed buildings. It was just horrible. The hospitals that had been um, demolished, the ambulances that had been targeted, and people killed in the ambulances. We came back and said we're going to take a lot of Americans to see what American war power has done, because it's, the U.S. gives $3 billion a year to Israel for purchasing weapons and all that. So in 2009, we had 5 groups of Americans and others, Canadians and Europeans, that went into Gaza. We wrote articles, we had seminars when we came back. Um, so we were really educating ourselves well to what was happening. And then I heard that there was going to be a flotilla in 2010. So I flew to Greece to talk with the folks of the Free Gaza movement who had organized this to see if they needed any help in the organizing. And it turned out that at the very last minute, they said, we have a space on one of the boats. Do you want to go? And I had my little suitcase in hand just in case they said that. And it was like, yeah, I want to go. I want to be a part of challenging the naval blockade of Gaza. And we had 7 ships that had been purchased and set off for Gaza. And that's when the Israelis, the Israeli commandos, lethally attacked our flotilla. They killed 10 people on the Mavi Marmara, wounded 50, and beat up people, tasered people on all of the other boats. I was on a smaller boat. I'd been on the big one, the Mavi Marmara, until just several hours before we turned and headed to Gaza, because one of the last boats to join the flotilla had come from Cyprus, and it had some European parliamentarians on it who wanted to be on the big boat. And so they asked for volunteers to come off the big boat to go on the small one. Okay, fine. And thank God I did, because I didn't have to witness with my own eyes the horrible, horrible brutality that the Israelis had on the passengers. Defenseless people, no weapons. Finally, some people started breaking off some part of the railings to hit some of the Israelis with, because they were murdering people. They were executing people. Bottom line was, we all went to Israel, got thrown into their prisons, and then eventually got out. But boy, that made us all madder than could be. Oh my. So the next year, in 2011, we had 10 boats that were ready to go. And the Israelis paid off the Greek government to find administrative ways to keep all of those 10 boats at the docks. Even though we tried, our U.S. boat to Gaza, we named Audacity of Hope, with, Barack Obama was president at the time, so we thought, we'll just name this one the Audacity of Hope. We set sail and then were stopped about 5 miles out of the port of Piraeus, Greece, by commandos, the Greek commandos, who were aiming their weapons at us, saying, you've got to stop your boat. It looked just like the Israelis. So we ended up stopping it, and 2 boats actually sailed later. But it got a lot of publicity, and the whole point is the publicity of internationals doing crazy things like trying to sail a boat and to break the naval blockade of Gaza. That does get publicity for what's going on in Gaza, and that's the whole point of it, is to not let the plight of the people of Gaza go unnoticed by the rest of the world as they continue to suffer And in 2012, there was another Israeli attack. 2014, there was an attack. 2015. I mean, the Israelis just attack with impunity. Anytime they want to, they get away with it. And the U.S. just sits back and gives them more money.
Was Cynthia McKinney a part of any of those?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Cynthia was a part in 2008. And part of the story is that in 2008, the Free Gaza movement actually got 2 small boats and sailed them from Greece, from Crete, and then they actually got into Gaza, and they brought people out from Gaza, students and people that had medical problems. They brought them out. Then they took another set of boats in, and Cynthia was on that last set of boats that was actually rammed by Israeli boats, and it almost sunk. So yes, she didn't get into Gaza, but she was there with Marie McGuire, a Nobel Peace Laureate, and with a whole boatload of folks that were very, very brave to challenge the Israelis in 2008.
I love Cynthia. She's a courageous-based queen.
She definitely is.
She's amazing. So connecting Israel to how the influence it has over our government. I'd like to get your thoughts on the Epstein affair. It's pretty clear that was Israeli intelligence in a honey trap operation to get blackmail on powerful people in the United States. What's your take on it?
On which one? I didn't hear the name.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh, Epstein. Well, I don't know. I hadn't really. I'm not knowledgeable about that. You mean just sex trafficking and all that?
Yeah, well, it's being able to get leverage over powerful people in America.
Oh, and what? Meaning he was one of the tools of the Israelis to do that?
Yeah, your thoughts on that? If you have any, if not,
no, I hadn't even thought about that. So no,
yeah,
I don't really have any thoughts.
Okay. Yeah, I've dug pretty deep into that. It's pretty clear.
Is it really?
Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein was definitely Mossad connected.
Oh, well, I'm not shocked.
Yeah. So when you worked for the State Department, did you have much interaction with fellow Colonel Larry Wilkerson?
No, I didn't. In fact, he was the executive assistant to Colin Powell, Secretary of State, while I was out in the field, out in Afghanistan and then in Mongolia. So I never was really back in Washington at all. And if I had been, I wasn't going to be invited up into the high altitude of the 7th floor of the State Department. But when I resigned in 2003, I was in Mongolia, as I mentioned, and the letter of resignation that I sent out, all of a sudden, all of my colleagues from all over the world, or many of them, started emailing me saying, "You're doing the right thing. I wish I could resign. Here we are in Mexico or in this place or that place. Everybody here thinks that the U.S. is a bunch of idiots for doing this. Why in the world are we doing it?" So there were so many people that were writing such, poignant statements, and they were saying, "I wish I could resign, but I've got kids in college, I've got mortgages, I've got this, that, and the other thing, and I cannot resign, so I've got to suffer through this mess." So I copied the text of these emails, and I thought, in the Army we were always taught, you better let your senior officers know if there's trouble brewing down in your little unit. And if you don't, and all hell breaks loose, it's you're part of the problem by not letting the senior leadership know. And knowing that Colin Powell and Larry Wilkerson both, came from the military, I thought, well, I'll copy this and send it to them and say, it's not really the State Department tradition, but it certainly is the military tradition that you let the senior leadership know what's going on. So here it is, 18 pages worth. It was a lot of stuff. And the only name I could find that had an email address with it was that was up in the secretary's office was Larry Wilkerson. And I didn't really recognize the name. I didn't realize he had been with Colin Powell forever, since Colin Powell was the secretary of, or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and all of this background. I didn't realize he had that, but I sent it to him, and very quickly I got back this note that said, well, thank you for letting us know. It's really important that we know this, and these are very, very difficult times. It's a very difficult time, which kind of, it wasn't like a comment that I could say, oh, I think he disagrees with what's going on, but it was enough of a acknowledgement that this was not just a done deal. And it wasn't until until Colin Powell left the State Department in 2004, and Larry was then kind of free from the government, that I met him after he spoke at one event. And I went up to him and said, I don't know if you remember me, but I was one of the 3 diplomats that resigned, and I sent you a whole long list of comments from Foreign Service officers all over the world. And he went, oh my God, yeah, I do remember that. That was really important. It was so important for us because, and then at that point he said, yeah, we knew that there was a lot of dissent in the State Department about this. And even though only 3 resigned over it, we knew that, so much of the department did not agree with this. And since then, of course, I've gotten to know him pretty well, and we've spoken at a lot of different things, and he's really a very solid voice for challenging all of the, now challenging, kind of like me. Once I got out of the government, I'm willing to challenge our government, and so is he.
Absolutely. And what was the response from your family and friends when you resigned and spoke out like you did?
Well, the family kind of went, oh my God, how could you possibly resign? I mean, you've been in the State Department and the military all your adult life. Why are you resigning over this? And why didn't you resign over that, or that? And it was like, well, maybe I'm just getting older and I'm just not going to put up with any of this stuff anymore. Friends in the State Department were, virtually all of them were saying, well, you're doing the right thing. And I wish I could resign, but I can't. I've got, the kids in college, the mortgages and things like that. Virtually nobody came back to me to say, you're an idiot. Of course, this is exactly the right thing we ought to be doing, bombing and killing all these Iraqis that had nothing to do with 9/11, and where it was well documented there were no weapons of mass destruction. This was just a convenient war to sell more weapons, and so it was, it took a while to get on my feet, kind of as a somebody that was willing to challenge the government and to start speaking out about it. Having been in the government all my adult life, then even though I'd resigned, it's still, I didn't know quite how I was going to handle and how much I would be speaking out and writing about it. But as it's turned out, I've been very welcomed into the anti-war community, and so I continue to speak my mind and do a lot of writing about, whether now it's potential wars on Russia, on China, on North Korea, and do a lot of traveling to countries to speak about U.S. policies from the perspective of having been in the system for so very long and now willing to challenge it.
Yeah, I admire that so greatly about you. So you wrote this great piece in popularresistance.org about Red Hill. So could you kind of talk a little bit about that and where things stand with that, and what do you think the future holds for it?
Sure. Well, Red Hill is the place where the U.S. Navy or the U.S. military back in World War II dug out a hill called Red Hill and placed 20 massive jet fuel tanks, or at the time it wasn't jet fuel because we didn't have jets, I guess, just fuel tanks, 20 stories tall. Each one of them is 20 stories tall. Each one holds 12.5 million gallons of fuel, and all of these are now 80 years old, and they're placed 100 feet above the aquifer, the drinking water of the city of Honolulu. And uh, we've been trying to get the military to shut those things down for a long, long time because there have been leaks. Back in 2014, there were 24,000 gallons that leaked. Over the period of time they've even been keeping track and can find the records, 72 fuel spills, fuel leaks have happened. Well, in November, another massive one has happened, 18,000 gallons that went into the water supply. That is the water supply for 93,000 people that are on the Navy's water system. The Navy has its own water system that covers the area of Pearl Harbor, Hickam Air Base, and the area around it. The rest of the island is on the Honolulu Board of Water Supplies. So 400,000 people are on one system, 93,000 now have contaminated water. And we don't want the jet fuel to go into the main aquifer, otherwise we're all toast. So we've been really, really pushing hard for the Navy to close down those tanks and to defuel them, take the fuel out. And you know, they can put them in tankers and anchor them offshore. There's capacity on the island for 60 million gallons. There are 180 in the tanks, they say, right now. They are now building tanks in Australia that can hold up to like 60 million. So we're saying get the fuel out before it leaks and contaminates all of our water. We finally gotten our congressional delegation that is generally very unlikely to criticize anything the military does because it's the numbers of military contractors that live here in Hawaii and that make billions of dollars every year off military contracts. We have 4 major military bases here on just one island, and it's been a cash cow for the state. So criticizing it, whether you're at the state level, the governor, or the congressional delegation, has been hard to get them to do it. But finally, because of citizen outrage, and in fact, you know, their own outrage too, and then finally recognizing it's time to close those down. So we're still pushing hard because the Navy, we know the Navy doesn't really want to do this. They want to keep those tanks because they're already there, and why not, even though they're leaking. So it's up to us as citizens to really put the heavy hand on them, the pressure on them, and for once and for all, get those tanks closed down.
Absolutely. So before we close out here, I was just curious what your experience was rising through the ranks of the Army and ultimately becoming a colonel. What was that process like? And what are some interesting experiences you had with it?
Well, it wasn't easy. I mean, being in the military is not an easy thing for anyone, but being a woman in the military is a little bit more difficult than just being a guy in it. And particularly when I joined up, which was back in the 1960s, less than 1% of the people in the military were women. So needless to say, sexual harassment was, you know, that was a given. Sexual assault, as it turns out, was going on at a much, much higher rate than I ever suspicioned. And it wasn't until actually the Iraq War when we had some very brave young women who started coming forward and talking about their sexual assaults that we started being able to track back that other women my age, were now finally coming forward to say, yeah, I was sexually assaulted. I was very fortunate. I was not sexually assaulted, and I pretty well held my own on that sexual harassment. I had good leaders, and if I had not had good leaders that, you know, would not put up with the sexual harassment part, and that gave me good opportunities to, you know, to be in interesting places and do what I thought were reasonable things, I wouldn't have stayed in. So I kind of had a career that was unlike a lot of people's, where they quit because it was like, I'm not staying with that jerk organization after what they've done to me, and I don't, and they should have quit because it was really tough then, and it's still tough for women. And even though now after long last, we finally got in the military, the Army, to take the issue out, sexual assault, the prosecution of it, out of the chain of command, where it was, you know, uh, perpetrators were being protected by senior people in their units. And finally, they said that sexual harassment is now, against the regulations. Finally, you would think, come on, guys. But that's part of the problem. Even though now 16% of the military is women, not so in the Marines, only 8%, and 14 for Army, I think it is, 16 for Air Force, and about 15 for Marines, for Navy. Still, it's a difficult time for women in the military. I switched over from the military at a certain point, went from active duty into the reserves, and that's when I went into the State Department. And so I've had a kind of a double career, both military and State Department. And from those two vantage points, that's what informs my writing and my speaking about my concerns about the U.S. government.
Absolutely. So were there a lot of politics involved to become a colonel?
Well, it wasn't so much politics. It was, well, in a way, I guess it is. In order to keep going up in rank, you have to kind of check the boxes in terms of certain types of levels of command, levels of military educational events. And if there are wars going on, if you're not a combat veteran, then you can kiss usually, well, certainly general officer rank. You can kiss that goodbye. So there are certain rungs that you have to go through, and the people that really move fast, I guess, on that level, there's probably some politics involved. Who you know, who's been your previous commander, how much they're able to help you move your career on. I really didn't have any mentors, so I was just kind of ambling along. And, I feel I earned my rank. I went through the educational process and the chains of command, or the levels of command. So I'm glad I did it. I'm not so sure I'd do it again if I had it to do over.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Well, Colonel Ann Wright, it's been an honor speaking with you.
Well, Eric, pardon me. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. Keep up the great work. Keep podcasts going. And we really appreciate all the efforts that you put into preparing for these and getting voices out there that perhaps might not have a chance any other place.
Oh, absolutely. And where can people find you and support what you're doing?
Oh, thank you. Well, I have a website. It's called voicesofconscience.com. And I do a lot of work with Hawaii Peace and Justice here in Honolulu, and Veterans for Peace, and Code Pink Women for Peace.
Absolutely. All awesome organizations and groups of patriots who are pushing peace in a more just world.
There you go. Thank you.
All right. Colonel Ann Wright will be in touch. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Take care, and peace to all.
Peace to all. Thank you, Eric.
Thank
Aloha.
you. Aloha, Ann.
Thanks.